Imagine, if you can, the scene. Barely 12 years of age, a slender figure standing before the imposing facade of a church, a heavy veil obscuring her face, hiding the innocence and perhaps the nascent fear in her eyes. She has been promised delivered to a man twice her age, a man she has never seen, with whom she has never exchanged a single solitary word. This is not a scene plucked from a Gothic nightmare or a grim, twisted fairy tale. No. This was the stark, unvarnished reality of life in medieval England, and indeed across much of Europe during those centuries. It was the accepted norm, a chilling truth for countless young lives. Today, in our modern era, we speak with natural ease and fervent passion about love, about personal choice, about the fundamental equality within marriage, concepts we hold as cornerstones of human dignity. But rewind just a few centuries, and those very words, as we understand them, simply did not exist in the vocabulary of women. Their destinies, far more often than not, were sealed long before they could ever utter a vow for themselves. Marriage in that distant age was not the sacred promise between two hearts entwined by affection. It was, in its coldest, most pragmatic essence, a contract, a transaction, a meticulously calculated strategy played out on the grand chessboard of power. And behind every ring exchanged, behind every vow whispered in Latin, lay a complex system designed not to protect love, not to nurture affection, but to preserve, to consolidate, and to relentlessly expand power. The power of families, the power over lands, the enduring power of dynastic bloodlines. In the next moments, I invite you to step with me into the world of medieval marriage, not the romanticized, sugar-coated version often presented in fiction, but the raw, sometimes brutal truth of a foundational institution. We will uncover customs that today would seem utterly unthinkable, even abhorrent. Children betrothed before they could even learn to write their own names, wedding nights witnessed by strangers as a matter of legal formality, and the terrifying, absolute weight of obedience, a near-total submission, meticulously written into vows considered sacred and unbreakable. This is the compelling story of how an institution, ostensibly sacred, became for many a gilded cage, and why understanding this profound truth, this complex intersection of love, power, and sheer survival, matters more than ever in our own time. Let us begin this journey into the past. In the harsh, pragmatic realities of medieval England, a child's entire future, their destiny, could be irrevocably decided with nothing more than a firm handshake, the clink of a bag of coins, or the transfer of a mere piece of land. It was a world where personal agency was a luxury, especially for the young. Marriage in this era was rarely about companionship, affection, or the blossoming of two hearts. It was almost exclusively an economic deal, a strategic alliance meticulously sealed by powerful families, often long before the children involved could even begin to comprehend the profound, lifelong implications of what marriage truly meant. A daughter in this societal structure was tragically not primarily seen as a person with individual dreams, nascent fears, or burgeoning desires. Instead, she was viewed as a valuable bargaining chip, a tangible asset to be deployed for the advancement of the family unit. Wealthy, aristocratic families used her to secure vast tracts of land, to forge crucial political alliances, or to gain indispensable favor at court. For the vast majority of the population, the struggling, impoverished families of peasants and commoners, a daughter might be exchanged as a means of sheer survival, her future traded for vital livestock, essential tools, or the promise of much-needed labor. Consider one chillingly stark recorded case from 13th century Yorkshire. A young girl was formally pledged in marriage before her 5th birthday, her fate sealed before she could even form coherent memories. Her father, in a transaction that speaks volumes about the era's values, accepted a small chest of wheat and a single cow in exchange for her hand. The girl, of course, had no say whatsoever in this momentous decision. Her feelings, her future aspirations, her very well-being, these were not considered relevant factors. Her existence was merely a means to an end for her family's survival or advancement. And once such an agreement was made, once the terms were set, it was nearly impossible to break. To do so could mean severe legal punishment, social ruin, or the devastating loss of everything a family owned, plunging them into utter destitution. Even in the cold, unfeeling eyes of the law, the girl was irrevocably bound by this contract. She didn't need to sign anything, for she was often illiterate. Her silence, her mere presence at the ceremony, or a whispered, coerced yes uttered under immense pressure from her elders, was considered sufficient to seal her fate. It was a world where the inherent value of a girl was not measured by her voice, her intellect, or her spirit. but by what she was worth to someone else, by her utility as a commodity in the relentless game of survival and power. And this, chillingly, was just the beginning of her journey. Because once the deal was made, once the contract was sealed, the next step in this medieval marital journey was often even more terrifying, stripping away the last vestiges of privacy and innocence. What does consent truly look like, feel like when you're only 12 years old? When your world is defined by the will of elders, by the cold dictates of lineage and land. In medieval England, that tender age was precisely when many girls, barely past childhood, were expected to stand at the altar, their futures irrevocably sealed. By 14, boys too, though often with slightly more agency, were frequently drawn into unions they never asked for, never chose for themselves. According to the strictures of canon law, the church formally required verbal consent for a marriage to be considered valid, a seemingly benevolent safeguard. But in grim practice, that crucial yes was often no more than a fragile whisper, choked back by tears or brutally shouted over by the insistent, demanding voices of powerful relatives. It was a legal formality, easily manipulated. Consent in this unforgiving era was rarely something freely given, born of genuine will or affection. It was almost universally demanded, a non-negotiable requirement of a system that prioritized property over personhood. Imagine, if you can, a young girl trembling visibly at the grand church door, her small frame overwhelmed by the weight of expectation, too terrified, too overwhelmed to speak. Her family, a phalanx of stern faces, presses in around her. A priest, his gaze impassive, looks on, presiding over the ritual. And then a father, a guardian, or a determined aunt speaks for her, their voice ringing out clearly. "Oh, she agrees." That chillingly was enough. The silence of a frightened child was interpreted as assent, her unspoken terror as acceptance. In the rare, defiant instances where a girl dared to resist, where she found the courage to utter a fragile no, the consequences were swift and often brutal. She faced relentless emotional pressure, veiled threats against her family's well-being, or, in the darkest cases, even physical force. Coercion in this world was not merely tolerated. It was masked as sacred tradition, an unassailable custom. Obedience, particularly for women, was dressed up as the highest virtue, a divine expectation. And if the girl, overwhelmed and helpless, said nothing at all, her silence was invariably taken as tacit assent, a silent affirmation of her fate. Her lack of protest was her undoing. In some of the most powerful noble families, where the stakes of alliance were highest, children were betrothed before they could even grasp a quill to write their own names. By the time they understood the profound, lifelong implications of marriage, the decision had already been made for them, their future irrevocably set. And there was, for all intents and purposes, no way out. No escape from the gilded cage that awaited them. It is easy, from our modern vantage point, to wonder why no one stepped in, why the church, ostensibly the moral compass of the age, didn't protect these vulnerable children. But in the cold, transactional eyes of that world, the system worked perfectly. It fulfilled its purpose, ensuring the continuation of bloodlines, the consolidation of wealth, the forging of alliances. The girl had served her purpose. She had become a wife. And the life she might have chosen for herself, the dreams she might have harbored, the path she might have forged, was never truly hers to begin with. Her journey, far from ending at the altar, was only just beginning as she stepped into a union where privacy and personal desire were often alien concepts. In the intricate, often brutal tapestry of the medieval world, a wedding was rarely just a personal event, a celebration of two individuals. It was almost invariably a profoundly significant political act, a strategic maneuver that could reshape the very map of Europe. One signature on a marriage contract could, quite literally, end a protracted war, bringing an uneasy peace to ravaged lands. One carefully chosen bride could unite entire nations, forging alliances that would last for generations, or at least, for as long as the political winds blew favorably. Affection, personal inclination, or romantic love had no place here. They were irrelevant, even dangerous distractions. Strategy ruled everything, dictating every alliance, every betrothal. Consider, for example, the formidable figure of Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and influential women in all of European history. Her life perfectly encapsulates this reality. She was married off first to Louis VII, the King of France, a union that brought vast territories under the French crown. Then, after a politically convenient annulment, a rare and scandalous event, she was swiftly remarried to Henry II of England. This was no whirlwind romance, no tale of passionate hearts. It was pure realpolitik, a calculated chess move on the grandest scale. By marrying a leaner, Henry gained not merely a queen to grace his court, he gained the immense, wealthy lands of Aquitaine, a sprawling duchy that nearly doubled the size of his burgeoning kingdom overnight. It was a geopolitical coup of immense proportions. For Eleanor herself, however, it meant a lifetime of relentless court intrigues, of navigating treacherous political currents, of enduring open rebellion, and ultimately of a bitter estrangement from her powerful husband. She bore 8 children, cementing the Plantagenet dynasty. Yet, despite her immense contributions, she famously spent 16 years imprisoned by her own husband, a testament to the brutal realities of power. And still, history, in its often selective memory, remembers her primarily as the indomitable mother of kings, her personal sacrifices often overshadowed by her dynastic achievements. Her story, though grand in its scale, was far from unique. Across the length and breadth of medieval Europe, from the sun-drenched kingdoms of Spain to the windswept castles of Scotland, royal marriages were fundamental tools. They were used to secure vital alliances, to absorb new lands into existing domains, or to seal fragile peace treaties after devastating conflicts. The bride, in essence, was the map. Each union, each exchange of vows, literally redrew the borders of Europe, shaping the political landscape for centuries to come. And among the nobility, the ruling elite, this was not only accepted. It was expected, an inescapable duty of their station. But what of the women themselves? What of the queens, the princesses, the noble daughters caught in this relentless machinery? They were, in the starkest terms, pawns in a game they did not choose, a game played by men for the highest stakes. They were used to secure peace, to consolidate power, to produce heirs, and then often they were discarded if they failed to fulfill their dynastic purpose, if they proved barren, or if they caused any hint of scandal. These were not fairy tale marriages, despite the later romanticized notions. They were cold, calculated chess moves, played by powerful men and paid for, often dearly, by the lives, the freedoms, and the very destinies of women. And as kingdoms expanded and consolidated their power, the personal freedoms of those at the very top of the social hierarchy often disappeared, sacrificed on the altar of dynastic ambition. In medieval England, a woman didn't just lose her name when she married, she lost her identity. The legal system made it clear. A wife was not her own person, she was her husband's property. This was known as coverture, a legal doctrine where a married woman's rights were entirely absorbed into her husband's. She couldn't own land, she couldn't sign a contract, she couldn't even take legal action in her own name. If she were wronged, her husband had to speak for her. If she inherited property, it became his. And if she died, he could keep it, even if it had once belonged to her family. Marriage wasn't a union, it was a transfer of ownership. Even the wedding ceremony reflected this. The bride stood on the groom's left, the lesser side. Her father handed her over like a deed, and once the vows were spoken, she belonged to her husband, not metaphorically, literally. In some cases, a man could sell his wife as if she were livestock. One record from 18th century England. Every detail of a medieval wedding carried a hidden message, and none of it was about love. The ceremony wasn't designed for romance. It was built for order, for power, for control. Take the veil. Today, it's seen as beautiful, symbolic, even sacred. But in the Middle Ages, it served a darker purpose. The bride stood veiled so the groom couldn't see her face until the vows were done. It protected the deal, not the woman. If he found her unattractive, it was too late. The contract was sealed. Then there was the positioning. The bride on the groom's left. Why? Because the right side symbolized strength and honor, the place of dominance. The left was for the lesser, the weaker, the subordinate, and let's not forget the exchange of rings. It wasn't a gesture of eternal love. It was a sign of ownership, a circle placed on her fourth finger to show she was taken, claimed, by another man. Even the best man had a role rooted in domination. Originally, he was the bride's guard, armed and ready to fight off any attempt to stop the wedding. If the bride tried to flee, he caught her. If a rival appeared, he drew his sword. The ceremony was loud, public, and unyielding. It declared to the entire village, this woman is no longer free. Her life, her choices, her future, they now belonged to someone else. And yet the most invasive ritual was still to come. The wedding feast had ended, the guests had danced, toasted, and celebrated. But for the bride, the most terrifying part was still ahead. The first night. In medieval England, a bride's virginity wasn't just personal, it was political, legal, and public. Her body carried the honor of 2 families. And proving her purity wasn't optional, it was expected. The bed linens were checked for blood. A stain meant innocence. It meant legitimacy for any future child. It meant the deal had been sealed successfully. In noble households, this proof could determine the future of dynasties. If no blood was found, the consequences were brutal. The bride could be accused of dishonor. The marriage could be annulled. She could be sent to a convent, disowned, or disgraced. In some cases, the blood-stained sheet was held up for the entire wedding party to see. In villages, the punishment was social. Rumors spread. The girl might be mocked, shamed, even beaten. And there was no defense, no science, no understanding, just a sheet, just silence. For many girls, that first night wasn't about intimacy, it was about survival. It was the price of entering womanhood. And for some, it was just the beginning of a lifetime of scrutiny and sacrifice. It's one of the most chilling ideas from medieval lore. The rite of the first night, or droit du seigneur asterisk. The belief that a feudal lord could sleep with any peasant bride on her wedding night before her husband. It sounds too horrific to be true. And yet, if marriage was the prison, the church held the key. In medieval England, the church didn't just bless weddings, it defined them, controlled them, and used them. On paper, it taught that marriage was sacred, a union of souls. But in practice, it created rules that bound women tighter than any vow. The church dictated when couples could be intimate. Not on Sundays, not on Thursdays, not during Lent, not during menstruation, not for 40 days after childbirth. And never asterisk for pleasure. Passion was sin, desire was danger. Sex was only permitted to produce children. Anything more was indulgence, and indulgence led to hell. Then came the doctrine of marital debt. A wife could not refuse her husband's demand for intimacy. Obedience was her Christian duty. If she said no, she was sinning. But if he refused her, it was considered a minor issue if it was addressed at all. This double standard wasn't hidden, it was preached, written into sermons, etched into marriage vows. Wives, submit to your husbands, said the Bible, and so they did, out of faith, out of fear, or simply because there was no other choice. The church claimed to protect marriage, but it rarely protected the people inside it, especially the women. And when things turned violent, the silence became even louder. In a medieval marriage, suffering wasn't a failure, it was expected. If a woman was beaten, the church called it a family matter. If she was bruised, shamed, or silenced, she was told to endure. Abuse was not grounds for divorce, because divorce didn't exist. Marriage was a sacrament, unchangeable, eternal. The only escape was an annulment, and even that was rare. You needed proof that the marriage was never consummated, that one partner was too young, or that one had taken a religious vow. Pain, cruelty, or betrayal didn't count. A wife could be locked away, used as a servant, or worse, and the law stayed silent. Even her own family might refuse to take her back. To leave your husband was to invite scandal, exile, or starvation. And in places where church power was weaker, local customs offered their own cruel alternatives. In parts of Germany, couples could divorce through a public fight. The man stood waist-deep in a hole with one hand tied. The woman had a sack of stones. Whoever one walked away free. It was violent, humiliating, spectacle over justice. And still, for some, it was the only option. For most women, there was no way out. They entered marriage young, voiceless, and bound. And if they suffered, they were told to pray, to be patient, to be silent. Because suffering, they were told, was holy. The Middle Ages may be gone, but their shadows still linger. Many of the customs we see in weddings today, veils, vows, rings, began in an era when women had no voice. The language of ownership has softened, but the symbols remain. Even now, in some parts of the world, child marriage still exists. Girls are still sold. Consent is still ignored. And the echoes of marital debt still shape laws, cultures, and courtrooms. In England, it wasn't until 1991 that marital rape was officially recognized as a crime. Let that sink in. For centuries, a husband's right to his wife's body was protected by tradition, by silence, and sometimes by law. Understanding medieval marriage isn't just about history. It's about seeing the long road of injustice and choosing not to repeat it. Today, we talk about love, partnership, and respect.